So, joining me today is Iranian American political content creator and friend of the show, Yeganeh.
Hi.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump into things.
Sure. I was born in Iran. I moved to America as a little kid post 9/11, so super good timing. I was raised mostly in California and then eventually moved to New York. And what else? I love cats. I'm not sure what else to say.
That's perfectly fine. So, I really wanted to have this discussion to give people some historical context on everything that's unfolding right now. I think there's a lot of confusion, especially here in the West. Um, Especially given, I think, with the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, it was a lot easier for people to contextualize that in the wake of 9/11. The justifications for the average American at least felt a lot simpler, whereas US and Iranian relations feel much more complicated. And so, give us maybe a sense of when you think the relevant history began. If you think 1953 and the CIA operation would be a good place to start, or if you feel there's relevant factors before that, you can start before then as well.
Yeah, I think, you know, America has been a colonizing force, but to really go back, we have to look at the British Empire. And I'm not one to try to blame everything on the British Empire. There is so much to blame on them, but at a certain point, we do have to take acknowledgement of our own mistakes too. But a lot of it goes back to British Petroleum and trying to take Iran's oil and trying to maneuver ways to weaken Iran into being able to get as much oil as possible with giving as little back to Iranians as possible. America, to be honest, their involvement in foreign relations with Iran wasn't necessarily deeply as tied to oil as it was for Britain. America's was more rooted in Red Scare, fear of communism, fear of the Soviet Union. So their willingness to go with the British to do these coups and operations and help BP was more rooted in tackling communism.
I see. And British Petroleum being the U.S. British company, if I'm not mistaken, that aimed to privatize Iranian oil after Mossadegh, who was, I think you mentioned he was parliamentary elected, but also selected by the Shah. Tell us a little bit about him and his relationship with oil and BP, and a little bit of that.
Yeah, sure. So Mossadegh was technically in a monarchy situation, democratically elected through the parliament, and he wasn't necessarily that much of an extremist that people think of him to be. He just wanted to nationalize the oil, and certain parts of Iran had already been moving towards that, Khuzestan, southern regions, but he really wanted to nationalize it overall because we actually don't have the numbers of how much Iran was getting. If you look at reports, it's kind of different all the time. Some people say 49% was going to Iranians, some people say way less than that. So this data was also being hidden from the Iranian people. What they knew is they weren't seeing that money, right? And so he wanted to nationalize it. And when he did that, um, Britain tried to actually take him to the ICC. They tried to take him to the international courts over this. That failed. Then they were like, okay, what do we do next? Basically, what is happening now as well is sanctioning or just keeping that oil from actually being able to be traded. So he was able to nationalize it, but the people again didn't see the money because you can nationalize it, but can you sell it? Can you get the money, or is Britain going to be involved in that? And oil, to be honest, also played a factor even after the coup, even after Mossadegh was gone, when Arab nations did their boycott to America and Israel. Iran was the one that came in and gave it to Israel.
The Shah's era seems to be, at least for many Iranians within the diaspora, sort of a time of nostalgia in many ways. Talk a little bit about the Shah, who this person was, what the times were like from 1953 up till the Iranian Revolution in 79, and give us a little bit
Yeah,
of context about that.
Just to clarify, Mossadegh was the prime minister, so the Shah was in power. He was
I
part
see.
of the decision of him even coming into being prime minister. They really were able to work together. A lot of the nationalizing before nationalizing, they were working together pretty fine, especially in Khuzestan, again, in the southern regions. He, the way they even got him to go along with Operation Ajax was by sending an Ayatollah to go talk to his sister. So they were both kind of, I think first he went to Iraq and then he went somewhere in Europe and he came back after the coup and Mossadegh had fallen. But it wasn't necessarily like Mossadegh was the overall ruler and then the Shah came and replaced them. They were working together and it just benefited America, Britain, and the Shah to give him ultimate power again and get Mossadegh out. Um, just to clarify.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's actually good clarification. So this coup then wasn't. It was more just an ousting of Mossadegh. It wasn't necessarily reimplantation of some other leader or other actor, given that the Shah was already there. And this is was this Pahlavi the Shah at the time?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, tell us a little bit about him, his relationship with Mossadegh, the coup, and then after that period.
Yeah, they prior to the coup did not have as horrible of a relationship as a lot of articles may say. He he had a lot of issues, so he had a secret police. It's called Savak, Savak. That secret police tortured a lot of communists. So a big backer of Mossadegh was the Tudeh party. So a lot of communists spent their time in Evin prison. Evin prison is notoriously a horrible prison for political activists. And a lot of people don't know, but that prison was built under Pahlavi. It wasn't built under the IRGC. And so already there was a lot of distrust. Another important thing about Operation Ajax, to go back to 1953, they didn't declassify those documents until a very long time after. So Iranians were living in conspiracy. They were living in, do you think it was a coup? Do you think this happened? It wasn't until much later the CIA said, you know what, we're going to let you read it. Just go on our website. That kind of distrust really hurt the different communist fractions that were within Iran, whether it was Mujahideen or the Tudeh party or more secular groups or the Islamic groups. And so during that time, there were huge advancements. Like it's unfair to say that everything was horrible. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many Iranians that live in that nostalgia, right? So certain things were progressing and the art scene was progressing, women's rights. He was trying to do these movements towards being seen as European or something. And it really, Iran is a big, big country. So some family might tell you, that was the most beautiful time. We had saffron to hand out, and then someone else might tell you, we didn't know how to read. No one in my family knew how to read. We didn't have access to this, and that. So it's really hard to say how it was for everyone. But, if we compare it to what's happening now, of course, and it's unfair to do that too, because right after the Shah left, it was the Iran-Iraq war. So a lot of these regions suffered not just because of this regime coming in, but because of a war immediately after for 8 years.
Right, right. So the conditions of Iranians, it seemed to be greatly varied between certain classes, communities, and from what I know, with the limited information I have, there's a lot of pictures that routinely circulate online of Iran pre 1979 revolution, and it's of people dressed in what seemingly people would dress here in the 1970s or 60s. It looks very Western, very, for lack of a better term, modernized. But what I also know is that that wasn't those pictures aren't necessarily reflective of what broader Iranians were experiencing at the time, and so so now I want to talk to you a little bit about why the 1979 revolution happened, because I think sometimes these sorts of things are framed in a way as almost though it's just like a foreign revolution that takes over when there was, you know, absolutely no base of support. And of course, that's not to say that the regime today is popular whatsoever, but there were clearly social conditions that led to this moment. So talk a little bit about why the 1979 Islamic Revolution happened.
Yeah. Same with the 1953 coup. A lot of different groups had started forming. So you had Tudehs, you had Mujahideen, you had Islamists, and we can see with a lot of movements, you do need a leader oftentimes. And what better a leader than someone who's exiled to France, someone who's willing to give their life for it. And that's how Khomeini came in. So a lot of people were fooled. They said they saw God in his eyes. He was the Imam of our time. He's going to save everyone. And before he took power, he was really uniting all of these different groups. You had Mujahideen walking the streets next to the Tudeh party, next to, you know, a secular group. It wasn't as though they necessarily all supported him, but they did. If you talk to the older members who were there during that time, who obviously regret it, they regret this regime that came in, but you ask them, what happened? Were you like brainwashed? Did you just drink the Kool-Aid? What went wrong? And they really describe it as one day they woke up and his face was everywhere. It felt very manufactured for a lot of people in that they saw him as a leader, but also suddenly his face was in pamphlets. And, you know, you look back at those 1979 revolution pictures and there's just so much of his literal face. And now, during that time, a lot of misinformation spread as well. And the Shah didn't necessarily help too much in this idol worship of Khomeini. So, you know, one thing people spread that they don't have a lot of evidence for is one night Khomeini said, okay, guys, when you go outside tonight and look at the moon, you're going to see this on the moon. And so then the Shah said, anyone who goes outside this night, I'm going to shoot you. And so people got shot and then there was martyrs. So you don't have like historical references to these things. You just have family stories saying, oh, this was the night no one could go outside because allegedly Khomeini was going to do something to the moon, and anyone who could say he did whatever to the moon got shot dead. So it was perfect for both of them because Khomeini could say, oh, you didn't see it because you didn't go outside, you'd be dead. I don't believe you. And then the Shah is also like, this religious extremist thinks he's going to put something on the moon.
So Khomeini really begins more so as like a religious figure, and and seemed to have been, it sounds like, backed by a lot of these organizations you mentioned, like socialist or Marxist organizations, who believe that, you know, they can utilize his both religious fundamentalism, sort of nationalism, and also to combine with the sort of socialist visions of political sovereignty. It seems as though one of the discontents among class, differences within Iran was U.S. Interest, or what was the United States and maybe Israel or the West's part in Iran during the Shah's period at this time?
At this point, Project Flower had begun, and Project Flower was Iran essentially seeing the type of weaponry that America was getting and telling Israel, you know what, I want these same weapons. Can we do a deal? And that same Arab oil boycott that I told you about, Israel was like, well, I'm not getting any oil. Would you be willing to give me oil? I'll give you these nuclear plants. I'll give you these bombs that you're asking for. So Project Flower was born under the Shah, and at that time, the Prime Minister of Israel. And he never got those bombs. He never got those bombs, and Israel got the oil and the funds. And so people were absolutely fed up to that point of, okay, we already had 1953. Where's our oil going? Where is anything going? And seeing, this was even at the point of 1953. The Nakba had happened. There was a growing disdain for Israel and America, especially within these groups that were rooting for Ayatollah Khomeini.
So I want to talk a little bit now about what happens post 79, both the conditions for the Iranian people and the Iran-Iraq war. Give us a little bit of preview into the lead up to the Iran-Iraq war, how that happens, and then the United States and Israel, if Israel had any involvement whatsoever.
Yeah, definitely. So 1979 happens, the Shah goes to America, hostage crisis happens, all of these things are happening at the same time. A lot of our parents and relatives would say it's like a blink, but also it it wasn't, some things weren't like a blink. So the chaos was like a blink, but certain rules like the hijab laws and stuff, it was a little bit after. So it just progressively got stricter and stricter. And so I'm from Khuzestan, which is where the oil and everything is. And, whether Saddam Hussein did it for his own beliefs or for that oil, he starts invading Khorramshahr, which is in Khuzestan, which is the south part of Iran. And upon doing that, Yasser Arafat, Palestinian leader at the time, was previously promoting Khomeini. He then he sided with Saddam Hussein, and that was for many different reasons during that time. Israel already had certain contracts in place. I mentioned the Project Flower, so they technically sided with Iran during that war. And it was absolutely horrifying. They went from Khuzestan more north towards Shiraz, eventually landing in, the city of Tehran, and it was years and years of just bombs and also trying to get used to this new regime in place.
And then shortly after the Iran-Iraq war, Khomeini dies, and then we have Khamenei, who was the most recent supreme leader, who obviously the United States and Israel had just killed. Give us a little bit about his legacy, his repression tactics in Iran, and he's really, I suppose, because he was the supreme leader in most of the Islamic regime's history. He is seen as probably the symbol of so much Iranian repression.
Yeah, so he was president before Khomeini died. So he was president in 1981, and then when Khomeini died, he was appointed supreme leader, which is the highest position. And I should have mentioned during that war also, Mujahideen, one of the groups that had previously helped Khomeini, actually sided with Saddam as well. So there were a lot of political prisoners in Iran at that time because they were trying to figure out who's helping Saddam, who's, MEK, who's a communist, and who's with the people and has fully transitioned into, being an IRGC member. And one of the biggest things that happened was the 1988 prison massacre, and a lot of those people were MEK, Mujahideen members. So that was a bit brushed over at that time because Iranians saw MEK as a boogeyman after seeing them side with the opposite country during a war. So it was started with that, then 1999, another massacre, and it just goes on every 5 to 10 years, sometimes 1 year in between. And he was what, you would call an extremist when it came to religion.
I see. Was and then you talked about the Evi, remind me the prison name.
Prison?
Yeah, tell us a little bit about this prison. This seems to have a lot of historical weight and meaning in Iran today, even.
Yeah, so Evin Prison, some people call it Evin University because of how educated everyone is in there and how many professors are in there. It is absolutely horrifying. If you can even get out, sometimes people just die after because of the medicine they give to them. I mean, I don't want to sound like that woman who left North Korea and she's like, they feed us rats every day. I think you know who I'm talking about. I don't mean to sound that dramatic, but it's literally that bad. Like they'll poison you in there. It's torture. They'll hang you. They'll um, torture you by making you stand at a wall and just shooting empties at you so you think every day you're going to die. It is a horrifying prison, again, built under the Shah, then later taken by the regime.
And obviously now today we understand that the United States and Israel are primary adversaries to Iran in the region, hence why they've gone about and launched this war. Can you discuss a little bit about their relationship with Iran and how exactly it came to this boiling point? Maybe specifically Israel's, considering their they've been at the brunt of each other's backs, both in terms of Iran, supporting, non-state actors in the region that are resisting to Israel, etc.
Yeah, so after the war in 1988, after Iraq and Iran's war, their relationship got worse by the second. I mean, in Iran, you'll have Death to Israel days where you just chant it, and it's really embedded. The area that they took the American hostages, which maybe that would be a good explanation, as I can also explain why they took
Yeah,
the American hostages, but
right.
that's been turned into essentially a museum that's anti-America and anti-Israel, and it has a lot of artwork. Um, did you want me to talk about why the hostage crisis happened and
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the hostage crisis, to clarify, happened in the midst of the Iranian Revolution. Is that correct?
yeah, so the Shah had left. The
Okay.
Shah had left, and the Iranian people wanted to, people wanted different things. Some people wanted to kill him, some people wanted to put him on trial for his human rights abuses, and America took him in. And not only were they doing it to get the Shah back, but there was a lot of classified information in that embassy that they wanted to get to. And I mean, I don't want Argo's not the best movie, but in that movie you can see them shredding everything. And it is true. They put the shredded pieces back together and got a bunch of classified information from that embassy. So it was like it was a spy mission as well, basically.
Okay. And and so yeah, like I guess maybe describe, maybe for someone who's totally unfamiliar with what this hostage crisis was, what exactly happened to the U.S. embassy, just like all of the events that essentially took place.
Yeah, the revolution had already essentially won. The Shah had left and Khomeini was there. And the Americans were sitting in the embassy. I'm sure they must have been thinking, when is this, um, when should we stop working and leave here? And the Iranians were able to break in and take the Americans, and basically they just wanted a hostage deal of give us the Shah back. And the Shah at this point, mind you, he was on his last leg. He was suffering from cancer. He was in America, later went to other countries. They just wanted the Shah back. And actually, I don't think they got their last hostage back until Reagan became president. And that's a whole conspiracy on its own, is did Reagan get the presidency because he had planned already in time that he would be the one to get the hostages, not Carter?
Okay. And then after the era of okay, so after this era of the Shah leaving, the regime is in place. Obviously, decades of social repression. Also, Iran, of course, begins to align more so even just with like international adversaries of the United States, nations like Russia or China, etc. There begins this movement of the Iranian diaspora here in the West, as well as the former Shah's son, Reza, who is someone that many on the West may often see through Western interviews. Who is this person, and why do you think there is such a not only a great Iranian diaspora that specifically want him to return, but also an Iranian diaspora that is even overtly Zionist in many ways? Because I think for a lot of people, hearing everything that you just spoke of, although it's clear that the social repression and the mass imprisonment, executions, etc., are clear reasons why the Iranian diaspora would hate the regime. But why would then they turn to the United States and Israel when it also seems as though there's a long history of the Iranian people also hating those nations as well?
Yeah. So the Iranian diaspora, a large portion that we see on television and things like that, they left when the Shah left. They left when Iraq dropped their first bomb. They grabbed their money, they grabbed their jewels, and they were out of there. So their memory of it a lot of them didn't even experience the war. They didn't experience the regime to the fullest extent either. So they came to places like Los Angeles or Great Neck, Long Island, DC, and they've been sitting on decades of nostalgia, decades of, oh my God, I had to leave my country same time the Shah did, and kind of mixing their own story in with his. So they see the son as a continuation of their own family sometimes. And that's based in trauma. It's not, I'm not here to judge them, but if you had to run away from a country and the person leading that country also had to run, you do feel a certain connection to them. And his alliance with Netanyahu has driven a lot of them towards Zionism. And to add, a lot of them view Iran as beautiful and perfect pre-1979. And who was Iran friends with pre-1979? Israel. So they think, oh, this is the key to fixing it. We just have to Control Alt Delete. Let's just go back to pre-1979. Everything was perfect. And, the Shah's dead, but his son looks a lot like him. Let's just hope he's the same guy. And I mean, it's actually a bit funny because the Shah, one of his last interviews he did with 60 Minutes, he was talking about the Israeli lobby and how evil it is. At this point, he was about to be tricked by Project Flower and he was losing it a bit. He had seen how much Israel had scammed him, essentially.
No kidding. And this was what, in the late 60s or sorry, late 70s before?
70s.
Oh, this was already, but this was pre-revolution, or this was after he had already fled? Okay, interesting.
Pre-revolution, he was still the leader. He did a 60-minute interview about how evil the Israeli lobby is, and it's just like, what is he thinking, seeing his son supporting Netanyahu in this way?
On the Middle East, the Shah is committed to a secure state of Israel. But he insists the Israelis must give back the Arab lands they conquered in 1967. And he believes the Jewish lobby in the United States helps breed Israeli intransigence on that matter. In fact, he says American presidents and presidential candidates are too quick to do the bidding of the Jewish lobby.
Surely, Your Majesty, you're not telling me that the Jewish lobby in the United States pulls the strings of the presidency?
Not entirely, but I think even a little too much, even for Israel interests.
You think the Jewish lobby in the United States is too powerful for the interests of Israel?
I think so. Sometimes they are disserving the interests of Israel because they're pushing around too many people.
How do you mean pushing around?
Well, pressuring. They have many means at their disposal. They are putting up pressure on many, many people. And at the end, I don't think that it will even help Israel.
But, Iranians, they're so diverse. Not all Iranians are Persian. Not all Iranians are atheist or Muslim. A lot of them are also Jewish. And so they have a tie to Israel that they think they have. And they end up representing it. But not all of them are also Jewish. It's important to understand that diversity and the ones that created here.
That's certainly something that I came to know through personal experience moving to Los Angeles. A lot of the Iranian diaspora here is, very close with just like the Jewish community. But then, of course, yeah, like you mentioned, there's a lot of people who have, both of those experiences. And so I certainly can see why it would make sense for those people specifically to be more in alignment with Israel. But I just find it interesting that, yeah, even among those who aren't necessarily pro-Israel, still maybe feel that tie or that connection. But, what would you say is, so tell me a little bit more about after the Shah left, he spent, I'm assuming, the rest of his life in the West. And when was his passing, and when did his son sort of become this Western figure in a way?
So the Shah, after seeking medical treatment in America, moved around a lot. He eventually was buried in Egypt, where a lot of Persians go and visit his burial site. I couldn't tell you the exact year he passed away, but he had other kids. So he had a daughter who passed away, a son who committed suicide. So he, after his passing, his family struggled a lot, especially his wife, continuing to live in Paris. When did his son, interestingly enough, so during the 2009 uprising, that's the Green Movement, he really wasn't pushing as hard for being this temporary leader, this temporary monarchy to lead into democracy somehow. He was even promoting some groups you would think he would hate. So groups like NIAC, groups like he would just be anywhere. If MEK did
NIAC being this American Iranian lobbying group that advocates primarily for less sanctions. Is that correct?
Yes, and was previously led by Trita Parsi, who people allege was working for the regime in Iran. So NIAC at that time was doing a lot, and you would sometimes see Pahlavi doing it, and you would see him at, MEK is very good at organizing a protest. He would show up at that protest. So it wasn't so much separatism as we see today. I'm not saying that you should go work with these groups. That's not what I mean. I just mean it wasn't like his father passed away and he was like, I am now king. I love Israel. It was a very slow transition to this psychotic point we've reached right now. In 2009, it did not look like this. There's even an interview of him, and maybe you could put it. I think it would be interesting if you could edit it in. I could send it to you, but he's essentially like, I can't go to Iran. I'm a Western guy. What am I going to do there? And people are like, are you going to run it remotely, like a Zoom king?
But you keep asking one question, whether or not I'm going to take my family back there. Because in a way, you are thinking whether or not you can take your family back there. We would all like to be able to go back home and be able to live there if possible. And I see in a realistic sense that we can keep flowing and going back and forth. We don't have to be pinned in one place. We cannot divest, because honestly, my life has been for the past 40 years here in America. My children live here, my friends live here, everybody that I know is here. So
it's almost unfair to them.
If I was to go back, what do I go back to?
What are some good and important sticking points or contextual things that I think like an average uninformed viewer should keep in mind when they're witnessing what's happening right now in Iran, both in terms of maybe, seeing this like both obviously celebrations, not just within the diaspora, but clearly, immense celebrations within Iran for the death of Khamenei. But then simultaneously, we're also seeing like organized protests from a small collective of pro-regime people as well. What are some important things to keep in mind when watching all of this unfold?
It is important to keep in mind that some of those pro-regime rallies you see might think, wow, that's a lot of people. So when the Islamic Republic, let's say, kills your child, you have to pay for the bullet. Okay? You do not get your child's body until you pay for that bullet. What do people do in return? They'll say, come to this rally. We'll give it to you for free. People are struggling so much. I'm not denying the impact the sanctions have had. They're struggling so much financially. They go to a village where people can't afford bread and they say, come, we'll give you this much money. You just got to hold this sign. So I'm not saying everyone in there, I'm not trying to take their autonomy away, but it is, we can never be sure about those pro-regime rallies.
It's almost manipulative. It's like weaponization of the economic woes inflicted on us by the West to rally behind the government in and of itself almost. That's what it sounds like.
And, a big pet peeve of mine is when people say, oh, well, these protests, not the ones pro-regime, but the ones against Khamenei, against the regime, they gave consent for this war. And it's just so frustrating because when has Israel asked for consent for anything? Everyone and their mothers could sign a petition and call their Congress member and beg for them to stop a genocide, and they couldn't care less. In fact, it feels like every time we push, they push harder back. And that's not to say, we're so powerless, nothing we do helps, but when have they asked for consent? And it's just unfair to say, oh, you people just shut up, never protest, don't be against Khamenei because now you gave consent. It's like, they're gonna do what they're gonna do regardless. You could bite your tongue and keep quiet and just let everything happen to you, or you could say, you know what, I don't want Israel to bomb me. I don't want my regime to hang people from cranes. It's not crazy to not want either. So when you see Iranians celebrating Khamenei's death, it's decades of being traumatized from him. It's coming from a place of trauma and pain, and giving that trauma a face, which is Khamenei's face.
Right.
It's hard.
Yeah, and I could see how that, even just like within an American context that is minuscule relative to what the Iranians endured, but like, you know, if fucking Canada took out, a part of me would be like, that's kind of cool, but then I would be like deeply also disturbed of what's happening to my country. Hey folks, if you're enjoying this conversation, be sure to not only follow our guest, but be sure to like and subscribe on this channel as well. It helps out big in the algorithm, and this channel has so much more to come, both interviews, conversations, reactions, and so much more. Thanks so much for listening. Please show support in the comments, and let's get back into it.
But no, Khamenei was against the Shah. He was a Shia cleric prior to the revolution. And so when looking for a supreme leader, they're looking for someone educated on the religion to be also a, you know, an ayatollah within it too. But to be clear, with the Shah, there was ayatollahs as well. With Mossadegh, there was ayatollahs as well. The ayatollah concept of an ayatollah running things and Islamic law is not new to the Islamic Republic. There were laws forbidding women from doing certain things without their husband's permission far before the Islamic Revolution. The Shah was Muslim, to be clear.
Interesting. That's actually also important context, because I think there is even sometimes like this assumption that, you know, it was, I guess, a bit more, and I don't doubt that, you know, obviously it would be more secular relative to the Islamic Republic regime, but that maybe how much more secular was is overstated. And so it seems as though it's a religious leader that has always existed, but now has essentially supreme authority over the government. Would you say that would be accurate to say?
Yeah, I think it's unfair. A lot of people will tell you, Iran is not Muslim, you know? They love saying that, but I'm like, your beloved Shah was Muslim. And there is photo evidence. He was Muslim. When also people are like, oh, there's no Muslims left in Iran. I'm like, where are you getting these statistics? Sure, these people are against the regime, but there is a deep, I mean, even the 40 days of mourning that we had for the protesters that were massacred, that is rooted in Shia Islam. So it is so deeply rooted in our everyday practices that maybe we don't even realize, oh, this is Islamic. Like, these things we're doing are very Islamic, and it's because of this trauma of the Islamic Republic. And the reason I keep calling it Islamic Republic instead of calling it Iran is because I don't want the people punished for something the government does. I'm trying to separate them. Right. But yeah, people, I think especially they see the son and maybe he doesn't practice. I'm not sure what his stances are on religion, but his father had to listen to Ayatollahs when he was the leader too. There was, and if you look at the coup, Ayatollahs played a big part in convincing and things like that.
In the convincing. Can you clarify that last point? Let me get his name. Convinced in favor of the original coup, or the coup in the 53? I see. Okay.
Yeah. So even the religious people at one point went against Mossadegh. Yeah. So Ayatollah Abul Qasim Kashani was the Shia cleric who turned against Mossadegh and played a key role in the coup.
So it sounds like it sounds like, I guess, within Iranian politics, I'm sure there's more than this. I'm oversimplifying this, but there's sort of these triad of factions. You have the Shah, the monarchists, the regime, the Islamic, the Ayatollah, the Islamists, for lack of a better term, and then the communists. And at times, the Marxists or communists or nationalists will have tried to nationalize the oil, and in that time the Islamists turned their back on them. But then in the case of the revolution, the Islamists and the communists work together, and then the Ayatollah stabs their back on the communists in that case. Sort of a triad of working relationships that are trying to grip power. Do you think that would be accurate to say?
Yes, and that's what a lot of the Iranian Zionists will use against current leftists, is they'll say, you're being tricked. You're being tricked by the pro-Palestine group. This is what happened. They convince you to do this, and then they turn their back on you. So yeah, that is their argument to better understand why they keep saying, oh, these student protesters, Mamdani, they remind me of the Ayatollah. They're gonna backstab you. That's why they hate him. They see this kind of like alliance and a Muslim, and they're like, oh, 1979 again. But yeah, the communists forever, the labor union members, the teachers union members, a lot of them are in prison.
Right. And it's sort of, I think it's not even, to some degree, in many ways, it's not unique to Iran that you have when countries, especially when they experience some sort of colonial or imperialist or foreign force, you have the sort of leftists that take this, anti-imperialist, anti-colonial stance. And then you sort of have the hardline, fundamentalist, nationalists, almost far-right sects that are fighting effectively for the same cause. And if anything, we're kind of seeing that unfold in America. You have like essentially Christian nationalists who are like, we hate Israel. Their foreign influence on our politics is so poor. And then simultaneously you have leftists saying, yeah, Israel, U.S. imperialism is bad. Yeah, it's really interesting that that in some ways seems to mirror in Iran.
Yeah, I think, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Marjorie, it's like a broken clock is right twice a day is really perfect for them. I'm sure the Zionists also are a broken clock about certain things. Certain things there's no person on earth you disagree with on everything. That would be nearly impossible. Like every person has nuance to them, but it doesn't mean you should listen to them or have. If you agree with two things that Candace Owens says, doesn't mean, go support her. She's going to turn her back on you too.
Right, exactly. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I think it was extremely educational. I know I already learned a lot, and I really appreciate it. Tell us where we can find you.
Yay. Okay, so on Instagram, it's Little Yeg with 2 G's, and on TikTok, it's Little Yeg with 1 G.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Yeg. I appreciate it.